Okay, let's call the meeting to order. And Amber, if you'd call the roll, please.
Okay. Charles.
Here.
Oh, she's right. Okay. Candy. Cook.
She's here.
She's here. Bill.
Here.
Okay. Rick Albers.
Here.
Okay. Mike Crowley.
Here.
Julie Jackson. Here. Chuck Jacobus.
Here.
Cassie. Here. Marion.
Here.
Ruben.
Here.
Byron.
Here.
Leah. All right, so everyone except Clea.
Okay. Welcome, everybody, and thanks for being here, virtual and live. I'm Charles Porter, I'm the chair, as some of you know, yes. It's just a couple of remarks I'll make. There's a lot going on right now. Tomorrow's a broker lawyer committee. They're considering a lot of different changes to the Farm and Ranch contract, have been working hard in Farm and Ranch working groups. We've got the Texas Realtors just set up a task force. We had our first meeting yesterday about contract forms. It's Farm and Ranch. A bunch of brokers from all around the state. We'll have another meeting in August. Y'all heard me pontificate about my work on the water paragraph and what's going on right now in that. The Texas Water Conservation Association, Texas Alliance of Groundwater District, Texas Alliance of Land Brokers, the TCEQ, the T, and TWDB all got together, and there's going to be a meeting here in the next 2 weeks to work on the language for a water paragraph in our contracts, not only in the Farm and Ranch, but they all want it in all our contracts, and you'll see more about that coming up. We got the worst drought, I think, in my opinion, we're going to have in Texas maybe since the 50s. If you go west, it's terrible. It's not getting better. So all that's going on. So there's a lot going on, and today we're going to cover a variety of things, kind of investigate maybe the property management course and talk about whether we want to do that. All those kind of items. So we've got a good bit to do today, and that's my opening remarks. Vanessa.
Okay. Good morning, everybody and everybody. We are in a hybrid situation, which I think everyone here is used to at this point, but I always try and give the same instructions. Did we disable chat? Is there a chat function?
I think I disabled it. Yeah.
Okay. We think we've disabled it, but if not, remember that chat is really just, I'm looking at the virtual folks, chat is really just for technical issues. And not to state, your opinion, your votes, etc. It's for, hey, I can't get this to work, or my sound isn't working. Can you read this into the record? So we just want to keep all conversations, deliberations, etc. Verbal, so that everyone has access to it. Second, if it looks like everybody's already doing this, but if you can be muted, unless you are actively speaking, that is best. We will try and mute you if you forget that and we hear some lawnmowers or dogs or all of the things that tend to pop up as soon as you are in a virtual meeting. And then if you will recall, if you're a member, you've got, we ask that you have your camera on. And if you will recall, there is a raise hand function, which as a member, you're welcome to speak up however, break into the conversation as you see fit naturally. So it's a little bit harder to do, I know, from the virtual side, but there's also that, the raise hand, it looks like this on your screen. So you can raise your hand and we will see that, and Charles will call on you. We try and be mindful and watch that, but every once in a while we'll miss one. Do not forget to unraise your hand, as I like to say. And that's really it in terms of the housekeeping component. Does anybody have any questions, issues? Everybody feel good? You can hear us all right in virtual world?
I'm not sure Candy can. She was pointing at her ear and shaking her head.
Candy, can you hear us? Guessing not. Candy?
I think that's a no.
Yeah. I think that's a fair.
Okay.
And we can work with Candy. We'll
I can see.
I'll give her a call and let her know that she.
Good idea.
We will, yeah, Abby's gonna reach out to her.
Okay, good. Next item, and I'll try to look at y'all and everybody somehow. Do we have it? We don't need to vote on the minutes unless we've got a change. Is there any kind of changes from the last week, that last meeting's minutes that we need to look at? Anybody? Can we move on? Is that okay? All right, let's move on. All right. Public written comments received on non-agenda items. Vanessa, Abby, do you have any? None at all? Okay, move right on through. Staff report on education enforcement matters. Pim?
Hi, everyone. I'm Kim Mayo. I don't know if people at home can hear me from here.
Can you all hear Pim?
Okay, great. The enforcement actions for this quarter, there's just 4. The first one, a CE provider acted without approval. They received an agreed order. And the second case was the DERF form was not submitted timely, and they received an advisory letter. The third case, a provider offered 2 qualifying courses 10 times. They had some COVID-related staffing issues that led to the courses not being renewed, but ultimately they did agree to an agreed order. And then the last case was another CE course that was offered after the approval expired, and that case resulted in an agreed order as well. Does anyone have any questions for me?
I do, if I may, Mr. Chair.
Yes, please.
Thank you. So of these 4, are they, I don't want to use the word, but I'll say repeat offenders?
No. None of these 4.
This is the first time that they've had to go through this?
Right.
With the exception of the one that did 10 or whatever it was.
Right, but this is their first disciplinary action.
Okay, thank you.
Generally, if we're seeing repeat offenders, at this point, we're just increasing the administrative penalty to help deter violations. We really haven't had to go beyond that, like probationary status.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Pim. We'll move on to Abby, an update on the quadrennial rule review of 535.64, content requirements for qualifying real estate courses.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to share my screen, so just bear with me a second. Okay, so as some of you may be aware, the agency is going through quadrennial rule review right now. And what that is, if you're not familiar, is it is a process that every state agency has to go through every 4 years, where they basically look at every single rule and determine whether the need for readoption, any tweaks, changes, to repeal, all of that fun stuff. I kind of think of it as spring cleaning a little bit. So for the most part, I would say the vast majority of our changes, as we've gone through this process, and we're nearing the end, we're on chapter 535 right now, have been non-substantive. So there hasn't really been any major change. You'll see, one of the changes we're making is changing salesperson to sales agent in the rule. That kind of thing is what you'll typically see. And this rule that we wanted just to bring forward is still non-substantive, but because it looks like it might be substantive, we just wanted to talk about it here and just make you aware. So one of our goals throughout this process has been to sort of streamline and make rules a little bit easier to read. And you have not seen this yet. I'm just putting it on the screen for the first time. But what staff has determined is, in looking through this particular rule, 535.64, which is content requirements for qualifying real estate courses, it is very long, and all of the information that is specific to each course is actually found in the course approval form as well. And in our experience, most folks are looking at the course approval form. They're not necessarily going to the rule. So to that end, what we've decided to recommend to the commission for potential proposal at the August meeting, so this is all up to the commission whether they want to propose it or not, is to remove the specifics from each course just in the rule and really direct people to the form. So this, again, it looks like a big change. There's a lot of strikers here. But really all we're doing is taking it out of the rule, directing people to the form where all of this stuff exists already. The process for updating a course would still remain the same. It would still have to go through the rule making process because these particular forms are adopted by reference. So it's no change in process for you all. You would still weigh in. It would go through the rule making process as well. This was really just an attempt to make the rule a little bit easier to read and not be duplicative of the form. So I'm happy to answer any questions about that, but again, this was more of a just, hey, this looks like a lot, but it's not really. Any questions about that?
Sure, please.
Mike Crowley, I believe you answered it, but maybe I'm just gonna ask it in a different way. If it's pulled from the rule and it's only used on the form, if we're going through a review of a course and some change has to be made, it's not as simple as changing just the form, it still has to go back to a rule?
Right, it does, because the form itself, the course approval form, is adopted by reference, and it currently is right now. And what that means is that the rule has essentially said, okay, this form is part of our rule. And so if you make changes to the form, you would still have to go through that rulemaking process. So it doesn't change anything, it's just an attempt to make the rule a little easier to read. And with the acknowledgement that we think most folks are looking at the form anyway and not the rule itself. So.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
You bet.
Great.
There's a-
Oh, please. Rick.
Oh, yes.
Yes, I just wanted to say I like this change, Abby,
Oh,
because
great. Thanks,
it-
Greg.
it takes away the potential problem of changing the rule, of changing the form and then not changing the rule.
Right.
And there's no need to do it twice. All that does is open up problems.
Problems or areas for mistakes. You're right.
Yes,
Yeah,
lots
absolutely.
of mistakes. Yeah, so I like it.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Abby, is that it?
That's it.
Okay, we'll move forward.
Thank you.
Item number 8, discussion of possible action regarding course completion certificate expiration dates. And Jen.
I'll start this. Mike Crowley,
Yes.
you asked a question at the last meeting and I responded incorrectly. We do accept course completion certificates from as far back as they go.
Yes.
And I confused the college course content review with, so I want to apologize to the group for misspeaking. So yeah, basically the question is, and it was inspired by a public comment from the last committee meeting, does this group want to consider an acceptable time frame in terms of how far back we'll accept qualifying course certificates? So I think, we've talked about this off and on kind of informally at different meetings. Some people have proposed that perhaps, we should only accept certificates of completion that were done within the last 5 years. One of the concerns that some people have expressed is the currency of the content in the courses that were completed.
Mr. Pioneer was talking about here.
Yes, that's correct. So I will open that to this committee's, with Charles's.
Yeah, please.
Charles'
That's
permission.
okay. Y'all go. Please go ahead.
Open for comment.
I have a comment. So I just pulled our numbers for our provider to see what type of effect does this have. And I was a little shocked at the results, to be honest. So we took 111 of 345 failed tests. They took their exams more than 365 days after they completed their courses. We had 43 test takers that they took their exams between 1,000 and 8,493 days later. So we're talking 2004. And they're still able to take their exam, and they failed. Now this should not be a shocker that they did fail. And we tracked it. Each person from our provider takes their exams. We track the exact date that they take their exams. We keep and use all of that data. That's indicative upon us when they fail. That's bad for the provider and our public pass rate. The other side of that equation is somebody could have taken their licensing education in 2004, just like some of our students have, and got a hold of an exam prep course, and even worse than failing is passing. because they're passing with information from 2004 by simply just getting through an exam. And that person is entering the industry, and of course, then we see what we see on the other sheet with all the infractions, right? So I think we should take a hard look at putting some sort of expiration date on these certificates. And it's not that it's unheard of. There are other states that do the same, Kansas, Missouri, there's others, where their real estate commissions have quote-unquote expiration dates for their certificates.
Mike, do you know what kind of timeframes the other states?
So getting information from them is quite difficult, as you can
Okay.
imagine.
It should be in the irrelevant digest.
Right, if they're irrelevant. Right.
Yeah.
But some are as little as 365 days, so 1 year. It depends on the legislative cycle, so if it's every 2 years where these laws are changing, then you look at the 2 years. Say, well, this information is only good for up to 2 years because that's when change is being effectuated in the state. So it does just depend.
I may be able to get that information. I still have my Kansas license and I have connections there, so, and I do believe it is under 2 years.
2 years would make sense, because the legislature meets every 2 years, you gotta revise every 2 years. And, you know, I had, all of my textbooks are on a 2-year cycle.
Right.
So,
I'm all for having an expiration date. I'm concerned about 2 years, and here's the reasons why. I understand the cycle, but we just went through a pandemic where people may have started their classes and through circumstances that they could not control, have been delayed in being able to test. I would be much more in favor of a more reasonable 5 years than I would of 2 years. I think 2 years is a pretty big restriction. Yes, it helps us as the providers. I'm not sure it helps the public. And the laws do not change significantly in a 2-year period of time to invalidate everything that they have been passed.
If I may build comment to that, we do in our rule have the providers responsible for updating content as it changes, whether through rule or statute or that
Right.
type of thing. So
Right.
there is that in place, if that appeases to some degree some of the 2-year thoughts. I think, and Vanessa or Abby can maybe speak more to this, there's something that you might want to keep in mind is that this would have to go through the regulatory compliance, and so the more restrictive, the more pushback we might get from the state.
I would like to recommend 1 year, but I know the reality of that. So going back to the data and just looking at students that we have access to, the majority of students that are failing tests are taking it over 622 days after they finish their classes, which is, we're looking at that shy of 2 years. That's less than 2 years. And so having a 2-year recommendation puts them at 730, whatever that day is, seems to be quite reasonable. And we should capture a lot of these that the content should be updated by the providers within that 2-year period. And so they should be getting relevant information. That falls on us and our rules as providers at that point. But then it should narrow that gap and in theory would be helping the consumer, right? Having relevant information, relevant test takers, not too strenuous of the time frame.
Candy?
Just out of curiosity, have we looked at the stats on the people who took it in the last 30 days and they failed the tests? Because I've been mentoring people who can't pass the test. So is it because they haven't had the class for 2 years, or is it because they're a bad test taker? That's my only question in this. We're using stats. We're talking about people who hadn't had the class for, 600 days. But we have people who had the class 30 days ago and they failed. So I don't know if we've got all of the statistics for this. Sorry, just being a nerd.
I do for ours, right? And it is available for all the test takers. Once you'll see the failure rates rise exponentially at 90 days or more after the date of their last qualifying course. Within that 90-day period, you're going to see a much higher, and it seems like common sense. The sooner you take your test, the more relevant the information is. Realize not everyone has that ability. whether it be financially, time constraints. But within that 90-day period, that's where you see most people passing their state and national exams. After that, the failure rate is raising exponentially by the day, by the month, in this case, by the year.
Is there some way, is there a way to make certain courses expire after 2 years? Like if we have our licensees that are required to take the legal updates every 2 years, why is it irrational to make someone who isn't licensed have that within the last 2 years? The principles generally stay the same, right? But the laws, the forms, those things are changing. So what if we had certain classes that had to be within the last 2 years and others could go back, say 5?
Well, principles 1 and 2 is essentially, it's everything kind of combined. So you're gonna have agency, you're gonna have contract law, you're gonna have all that in those. So if something changes in contract law, it's gonna change principles. If something changes with agency at the state, it's gonna change in principles. If something happens with finance at the federal or other level, you're gonna find that in principles. So they really do all go together.
Kind of hard to separate them.
It really is.
Yeah.
I understand all this from the provider side. I don't understand it from the user side, from the brokerage side. I'm gotta tell you, if I can pass a course in 2 years and then I get licensed after a course that's 2 years, I don't have to take another class in the state of Texas for 2 more years. So you're telling me I can pass a test and be there for 4 years, but we're gonna make it hard to get our license. That doesn't make any sense. And we're seeing people and hiring people on a regular basis that took their courses well over a year ago in the field. Why are we gonna make it harder to get the license?
Good point. Let's backtrack for a second real quick. I should have done this. Can we get a thumbs up if we want to put any kind of expiration date on it? Is everybody, maybe we haven't looked at that. We want to put an expiration date on it. Would y'all thumbs up or down? Okay, thanks. So really now all we're talking about is the number of years, I think. So because we want to, this is a possible action item, right? Okay, sorry I had to do.
Could be.
It could be.
Could be.
I think, so I'll speak a little bit to something that you brought up to an extent, and Jennifer mentioned it, looking at Regulatory Compliance Division of the Governor's Office, which I cannot remember if this group has been through, I don't think so. But Regulatory Compliance Division is always going to look at our rules that potentially increase any sort of restriction, barrier to entry, et cetera. And that does not mean it's not possible, but it needs to be grounded in, well, 1, protection to the consumer, right? But 2, in data. And Mike, I think you're speaking to your data, which is super helpful. In order to move forward with a formal recommendation, I think you would probably want a lot more data. Just to see, and I don't know, I'm looking at Jen right now.
I know. My wheels are turning.
And I don't, yeah, and so
determine
some of this is something that we'd have to go and figure out, okay, well, what could we pull? What would, there may be providers out there that are willing to give us this data to, just to show what that looks like, what that passage rate looks like. But you really, I think Bill's raising good points too, right? And where is the consumer protection component of this? What does that time look like? This is the conversation to have in terms of moving forward. And it seems like everybody generally is like, oh, this seems like a good idea. We're really going to want to ground any true recommendation in data, which we probably cannot do today. Though I think you have enough of a launch pad right now to keep this conversation going and for us to work, possibly for some of you to work to the extent you can get this information in the data, right? Because we'd have to show regulatory compliance and the commission, there's a reason for doing this. And it protects the consumer. It's putting out, better folks out there who are more current. They know what they're doing. It's helping that passage rate, right? I mean, that whole conversation, the sooner you take your test, I get that. So all of that is to say, I think the discussion here we have, or you have, I will listen, and toss around the years, the time, what you're seeing out there, et cetera. And then probably at the next meeting, we come back and we really dissect the data and have a better landing spot.
Well, that's pretty much the takeaway I'm looking for from this conversation, is to just process what your thoughts are and then think about what we could provide you as staff. Obviously, it would be something I would need to work with our IT department on in order to provide some data. But yeah, from my perspective, I'm information gathering from all of you and all of you.
Rick?
Yes, and I just want to kind of echo Vanessa's comments, because I brought up in the past a number of consumer changes for consumer protection. And I was sitting back here just thinking everybody's sounding just the same way that I used to sound, and the way I still do. But every time I've been shot down by that letter from the governor that says, I don't want you putting up any roadblocks to entering the industry. And I have a different interpretation of that letter than most, because I think that letter was sent out to all agencies. It wasn't just sent out to the Texas Real Estate Commission. But we do need to be mindful of that. He's still the governor, and we need to come up with a good, balanced reasons driven by data if we're going to put up what really is a roadblock to entering the industry. If you're going to put a time deadline on these certificates, and I absolutely think we should. I don't know that 2 years is the correct amount, though, and I like the suggestion of maybe some of it's 2 years, maybe some of it's 5 years. But if we're going to do something like that truly is a roadblock to entering the industry, we'd better be able to support it and why it needs to be done.
It'd also be a requirement on the providers as well, so we need to think in terms of that. So I think Rick, you're speaking my language over there. I love it. But I think we also want to think about that provider side too, right? So it'll be a new requirement.
Well, not so much, no. Probably it would be a revenue generator, because this, if the students took the courses 5 years ago and we require them to take them within 2 years, they've got to go take them again. But there's not a component of this that requires a provider to revise necessarily any course. We wouldn't be revising course content every 2 years, unless, that's what this committee decides to take on, but that would be separate.
But it would be, and I started thinking about something else, if I saw something on there. It would be a new submit, like, it would be revenue, like they'd have to submit, they'd have to pay more frequently, or am I just missing?
Not the providers.
Not the providers, just the
The
students.
students,
Okay,
yes.
all right, I'm sorry, I think I had that wrong.
Yeah, just the students.
Well, then never mind.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
comment. Two comments. One is, I respect the governor, and I hate to know that politics plays a big part of this, and I understand that. I'm a part of the Purple Party as a realtor. It seems to me that, and I'll say this publicly, that your hands at Trek are being tied to not be able to protect the consumer based off of that letter. Second part is, Mr. Chair, do you need a formal recommendation to direct staff to do this research and gather the data and bring it back for the records? Or are you okay with them just discussing that and saying, we're going to do it?
That was my next question, Ruben. I was going to say, do we need to go ahead and have that vote and have the staff actually work on that? And it needs to be, if y'all help me with this, credible data that is directly responsive to this question, that can take a hard peer review, because we're going to get that from some of the providers. Just like you talked about, what do the statistics really say? So do we want to, would you like to make that motion, Ruben?
Absolutely.
Good.
So you want me to reword it? I mean, word it all over again?
How would,
or just say, I so move?
You.
I think we have the details.
Okay, good. Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, I move that this committee give staff the direction to gather the data, the facts, and I'm not sure what we're calling this, this task itself, but to be able to bring that information back to our next board meeting to discuss that with their findings in reference to the putting a date or not having a date for the certificates for a proposed agent.
Perfect.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
A second.
All in favor, I guess, raise your hand.
Yep.
Any opposed? Anybody opposed? Okay, looks like unanimous. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir, thank you.
Okay, we've got two other items. One, we're gonna, probably number 10 will take a while, but number 9, we want to talk a little bit about discussion of possible action regarding the Broker Responsibility Working Group's recommendation to review the qualifying course for property management. Vanessa's going to introduce it, but can I say something before? Let me bring something up today. In a meeting last, I don't remember what it was, one of the meetings I was in, the good news is Texas A&M University is now updating the landlord-tenant guide. It had not been updated since March 2019, and we'll have a full update, Rusty Adams said, this summer. That's the one guide that as brokers not being attorneys we can rely upon, I think. And so that's going to be very helpful. I'm looking forward, as he said when I sent him an email in the middle of that meeting the other day, he said he completely revamped it. It should be out this summer. So that's going to be very helpful because there are a number of substantive changes came out of the last legislative session, which you can get on the Texas Realtor website. I guess our big question before Vanessa introduces, and it came to me and I sent out, because I don't like trying to do things without some kind of document to look at, the information I put together that's sent out. Should we require this class to cover items that TREC does not regulate? And if you look at the new page 54 of the Broker Responsibility Manual, what property management is regulated by the commission? Now, this hasn't been approved yet. It's our draft that we worked on for so long. Under TREC license section 1101.021AX, a person needs a license to perform property management for another if the person controls the acceptance of deposit or rent from a resident of a single-family residential property unit. The next thing we say is what property management is not regulated by the commission: commercial, apartment complex, duplex or fourplex, and single-family residential where the person managing the property owns the property. Now, keep that in mind because we're not going to make any decisions today, but that occurred to me after I did this stuff about commercial property management, which I've done for my own properties and other things. Maybe that's a more basic question we ask. Go ahead, Vanessa, now I'll let you.
Okay.
Say mine.
No, I think that's great. I was just going to give a little bit of a reminder intro on where this came from, and speak a little bit to what we've looked at in the interim. So in your email, I think it came from Amber. It came from Amber. We linked you to the Broker Responsibility Working Group, one to the actual comments that were submitted by Mr. Warren, and then also to some of the conversations that have been had regarding this topic. And it's still going on a little bit over there, but the recommendation from that group to ESAC was to look into the possibility of opening up the property management course outline and seeing whether there's anything that needs to be updated, revised, keeping in mind the comments that have been received. I think also keeping in mind, what, not just those comments, but what that outline looks like. It's been a while since it's been revised. I think there's a general appetite on the TREC side to open it up with Mr. Warren's comments in mind, but also to the extent that it hasn't been opened up in a little bit. And so you asked us to do some, staff to do some research. We gave you some information on enforcement actions. There's a little bit of a pie chart that was in those materials, but you were asking about enforcement actions against folks who had taken the property management course, which we could not do just based on how our database works. Yeah, I mean, that's a very specific one to make it work. We're in the process of working to get a new database. I'm not sure if that one would, but it's something for us to keep in mind. That said, Mike is here. I think he can speak, Mike Malloy, who's Director of Enforcement, I think he can speak to what they see, generally speaking. We talked about it earlier today, and to some extent, people who are gonna do really bad things are gonna do really bad things, right? I think we all know that. That's not to say we should not try to teach and deter, et cetera, but the folks that are gonna really go out and steal people's money and things like that, of course, probably isn't going to take that out of them. But perhaps there's room in that course for sort of more practical application, best tips, something to look towards fewer negligence issues, a more practical application of the course itself. And Mike and I talked about that this morning, just, he's recently taken that class, what he's seen. So the thought is, I mean, today we wouldn't open it up today and say, hey, let's strike through this, let's not that, but is this something that this group wants to open up and really take a look at? Because we know that property management is the subject of complaints. We know what's going on out there. For the most part, is it folks that are, I'm gonna just keep saying bad people, doing bad things? Probably not. I think those are the outliers, but how much is in there of people who don't really know what they're doing or who are acting outside of their scope, not realizing that, and what could we look at in that course with this group's eyes, should you wanna open it up? And so Mike is here to answer any questions. He can kind of give you I might have stolen all of his thunder, which I routinely do. But, he can speak to what they see generally, his experience in the enforcement realm. And then this group today will take a vote on whether you all want to open up that course for review and revamp it a little bit, right? What maybe a little more practical application. Just see what's in there and see what could be better.
I like the fact that you brought the numbers. Thank you very much for that. It's only a very small percentage of people that are bad actors, 1.6 to 1.7. Those are the people that are gonna steal anyways, right?
Those are our Ashley Williams.
Huh?
Those are our Ashley Williams.
Oh, okay.
People.
Okay.
And that could be, my statistics, they've gone down progressively since 2008, since 2009, but we've been kind of tracking this for, I think we started this report in 2011, I think. And generally what you're looking there is, there's two categories that kind of hit on there, which are the red and the yellow, leasing property and misappropriation. That could be, some of it's like 32, that 1%, it could be two people, two license holders, and we have several cases open against them. For like Ashley Williams, we had 42 cases open against her. So when you saw a spike that year, that was because of one person. She took the course. It didn't stop her from stealing. And a lot of the other people that I ran the data I did have, I did some spot looking since we couldn't cross-reference the education. A lot of people do go and take it because, if you're in the industry long enough, you need to get the hour somewhere or another, so eventually you end up running into it and taking it. Personally, when I see stuff, it's a lot of brokers that have been they don't get what's going on. So getting the brokers more involved in what their sales agents are doing, I think would deter a lot of that negligent stuff. The theft is just gonna happen, unfortunately, in some cases. But the stuff where people make an honest mistake or just don't know, it's where their broker is just not there holding their hand because they never done it before. They didn't establish a trust account, so that type of stuff. It's like technical kind of violations, but still have a big impact on, consumers' protection because, for example, you don't have a trust account, then where's the money? Who's controlling it? Things like that. So I think it could have, I mean, the brokers already have to take this in order to get their broker's license, but that's why we bring it up a lot of times in the broker responsibility course. And I think they need to understand the seriousness of that overall, because chances are if you have a sales agent that's gonna get in trouble, you're gonna get hit too, especially in property management situations, so.
If I could add a little light from I was ombudsman for Texas Realtors for 10 years, did about, I don't know, at least 20 cases a year. I haven't done it in the last few years, but what really started to occur, I'd say a third of the cases were someone who had bought a piece of property on the internet and had never seen it and had hired a property manager, didn't know if they were licensed or not, and they'd ask, how do I get my first few months rent from this property manager and deposit I never received? And as Texas Realtors, we said, we can't do that for you, so we passed it on. But I mean, I don't know how much more that's going on. I think the internet aspect of these things came up, for what that's worth.
I may have gotten the totally wrong idea about this, but to me, when all this stuff started about property management, the problem that we saw out there in the field is that you have a real estate broker who maybe made a sale, and the people who bought the house are now going to Saudi Arabia for 3 years and say, what do I do with my house? And the realtor says, oh, I'll manage it for you. Not having any clue as to what Chapter 92, 93, and 94 are all about, not knowing anything about landlord and tenant statutes. And so the effort through broker responsibility and the law updates is, at least how I've always taught it, is to tell them this is a professional business. And the fact that you got a commission on the 6% sale doesn't mean you know how to manage property. So in the broker responsibility course, we said, if you're going to manage property, these are the rules. And then we go into the trust accounts and whether or not you have to be licensed to do it, and that's really limited to one small area at this point. But it was to keep brokers, particularly brokers, involved on saying, should my agents go out and manage properties or not? And a bunch of my clients are saying, no, I'm not going to let my agents go out and manage properties because they don't have enough background. Well, what broker responsibility does is inform you of that background. And if we start getting into a property management course like this one is here, it's a good course. I think it's something that everybody, if you're going to manage property, there ought to be something available for you to know what to look for and how to educate yourself and all that. And you don't fall into the pit, of saying, oh, well, that's just easy and I'll do it. And they don't even know what a trust account is. They don't know how to handle things on behalf of somebody else. I had a property in New Braunfels, just to give you a short background. I had a property in New Braunfels that was professionally managed by a lady up there who managed all the properties in New Braunfels. And when I bought it, they said, oh, you have to hire her because she does all the property management. I said, okay, so I hired her. I get a letter from her one day, and she said, here's how much you made, and here's how much I spent, and here's my fee, and here's how much you should get. Thank you very much. And she says, you may notice that there's no check with this letter because we were running a little behind over here and I had to pay the bills. So I went ahead and paid the bills, but I'll catch up with you next month. Whoops. Now, here was the lady who now I'm talking about this is 1990, before we had all these great education courses. But she just thought she could manage because she thought she could, and she didn't know any of the rules. And I started talking to other friends up in New Braunfels, and I said, is she managing your property too? And she was into some of these people for like $9 grand. And I said, that's still JP jurisdiction in those days. You may want to run over there and file a complaint against her. She ultimately lost her license, thank goodness for Trek, because she just flat stole the money. And if you're not trained and you don't know what the rules are, and you don't know what a trust account's for, and you don't know what the landlord and tenant laws are, That's not fair to the consumer.
Should be.
You need to teach them these things.
Absolutely.
And that's why I like the broker responsibility course so much. I don't know that we need to go into this much detail, but the broker responsibility course makes the broker acknowledge that there's a problem here. And that these sales agents need to be trained to do this, not just think they can do it because they have to have a real estate license. And when you get to commercial properties, of course, the license act doesn't apply at all.
That's right.
And in my office building, for instance, I represented both the brokers and the office building management in my building. And we have one company that does the leasing, we have one company that does the management, and the two don't meet. For a bunch of obvious reasons. But the commercial people have kind of taken care of this to a great degree by saying we're gonna separate these two issues. I still think we see a lot of hybrid stuff coming out of the residential stuff. And that's why we need to keep them updated, informed, and kind of warned about what this is supposed to be. Anyway, that's.
It sounds like the education, if they're looking and they're saying, hey, they're taking these classes, they're just not doing what the classes are telling them. They're not following the recommendations and they're not following the rules. We've already had this discussion in previous years about a property management license, and we know where that went. What mark are we trying to move? I guess that's my question.
Well, was the question that originally came up, should we open this?
To look at the course.
To look at the course to make sure it's being taught correctly and we have the right things being taught?
Yes.
And I think the answer, at least from my perspective, is yes, we need to do that, make sure that it's updated, it's being taught. I wish there was a way that we could say, obviously, the education standards can't, but the TREC could say, if you're gonna manage property within 6 months of managing property, you have to complete this course. So that we have people who are out there, if we truly wanna protect the public, why in the world would we let a licensee whose broker may be thousands of miles away from them, never seen them?
Yep.
Start managing property when they don't have a clue what's happening. And the only time that we realize there's a problem when a consumer is wronged and files a complaint, which takes a lot.
To bring up to date on that, with, again, the broker responsibility manual, we're just about 100% finished with it, but there's 3 pages about property management in it. We make it real clear about areas what TREC does not cover. You know, we all know in the Texas Farm Association Red Book, which is expensive, is the one that most people use that do property management. Landlord tenant guide's great. How far we go into detail, who knows? You know, I don't know that we need to talk about this today, just some ideas. But do we want to, Bill? Do we need a motion to bring this up? Do you want to make that motion?
I'll make the motion to open up the property management course approval form.
Good.
Second.
Any further discussion?
I'll just say, Mike, to your point, I think this is where this group can move it, right?
Agreed. Let's make sure we're going in that direction, because I agree.
Yeah.
Any further discussion before we take a vote? All in favor? Raise your hand. Anybody opposed? Okay, it passes.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
If I may, before we leave this subject.
Sure.
These minutes are, do become public record, right?
Yes.
Okay. I would ask that the name of the licensee who was brought up earlier by staff be removed.
I think that's, sure.
Please. Thank you.
I guess the question we have too is, before we move on to the next item, we all want to kind of, how we want to do this. Do we want to have a working group? Do we want to just all send in? And I guess the first big question is, when you look at this, think about it. We've got a large section, and I just drafted this up so we can talk about something. Definitely one, we got a big section about commercial property management. Does it even need to be in there? Should we, do we need to have a course that they have to take of areas in which we don't cover it? They're not required to be licensed.
We get very few commercial related.
Yeah. So, I mean, that maybe then we need to, the possibility is then that we can find time to plug into other items and not go into all the detail I put in about commercial work and talk about trust accounts and and give them some sources that they can go to, not just a landlord tenant guide. And tell them they're not lawyers. They don't get to consult about it and interpret that.
And almost all commercial management companies have on-the-job training. They have internal education courses they use, and we did certainly. And so that your property managers know what they were doing. It was a constant reaffirmation, of what their job is. But going into the commercial arena is a very complicated arena.
No, it's unbelievable.
And I don't know that we really need to jump into that arena because of the license act, what gives us the authority.
I agree, and I think probably apartments also, duplex and fourplexes. One thing that I'd forgotten, but in our first legal ethics manual, we wrote up a court case, Caldwell versus Corione, where the Corione fella had known about toxic mold in the rental of house and deliberately covered it up to the point where he actually painted the carpet strips to hide the mold. I had forgotten about it. It went to the appeals court. It said the realtor, that the owner of the property was wrong. So did it create disclosure obligations for the landlord? I don't know. Would it create a disclosure obligation for the property manager? It seemed like it would. So anyhow, that was an old case and it came up and I actually had forgotten I was an expert witness in that case, but we wrote it up in our Legal One manual. So I don't know how we go about this. Do we want to have a working group? Do we want us to all throw in and start sending things to Jen?
I will say, we can do a working group. We are, as from the staff side, we've got a lot of working groups. So it's hard for us to give the attention to that and then to come here with that. I think you could, though, in this interim, similar to what Charles does, is take that outline and write your notes for each and every item, and then we know that when we come back here in October, that's gonna be the bulk of the discussion and the work happening in here. I only caution against the working group just in terms of true bandwidth and the ability for us to all really participate.
So the first question will be then, do we want to cover anything outside? Let's get everybody to think about this. Do we want to cover anything outside the areas that TREC regulates? In other words, do we want to cover commercial, apartment, duplex? Do we want that in that class?
Well, but apartment can meet some of those residential requirements.
Sure.
But I think pure commercial, no, we don't need to go into that.
Duplex, fourplex?
Yeah, duplex, fourplex, single family residence.
Single family residence where person managing the property owns the property.
Right.
So, okay, well, let's think about that and leave it at that. And if anybody who wants to send me any kind of comments through email, I'll gather them all up before the next meeting. I'll be happy to, and send all you want. If you need to send it by Dropbox, send it by Dropbox.
Should we have a date we need to get those to you?
Yeah, so if you're gonna send, I'll just say this, if you're gonna send written comments, send them to me.
Okay.
Just for open
Okay.
meetings purposes. So I can gather those, but additionally, you could also come with your notes and ready to dissect. Either way, I'll take them and get them put in the material. I say that. Amber will help me get them put into the materials. No one wants me messing with the materials. And then I think, Jen, did you have a question or?
Yeah, I just wanted to echo the process that Vanessa explained. I think, you don't need to get super into the weeds with it, but if you were to take the current form, and if you have ideas of things that you would strike to make room for other topics, just kind of make note of that. And then separately, you don't even have to plug it into the form, but say, here are some topics that I feel like are missing from this course in general. But through the process, on the back end, we can look as staff or even with you all, but as to determine what are the most appropriate topics for those new subject matter content to be put in. And then through the process, we bring you back a draft, you look at that, you critique that, say, hey, you missed this, or I want to see this, or this should be moved here. So there's ample opportunity for feedback before we actually move forward with something.
And I'll just add one thing too. I think in your materials, you've got the statutory language from the Real Estate Act and then the rules. But the statute lays out some required topics for this course. So that's something to also kind of just have in the back of your mind as you're going through that outline.
Right.
There's some topics that have to be in there, but it's, it's not, they're pretty broad, so.
Okay, any other discussion about that? We move forward, anybody? Okay, let's move on to our 10th item, discussion and possible action regarding qualifying course outlines and addition of content related to the broker-agent relationship. Jen?
Yes, I will start this off. Essentially, we took back all of the input that you all provided at the last meeting, and went back and listened to the recording of the meeting a couple of times again, and tried to plug in everything that we heard you say you wanted to see modified in this course content. And so today, before you, we've brought back that document for you to review, provide input, like I said just a minute ago, tell us if we missed something. But this is what we heard you say that you wanted.
So we also talked about, and I don't know how we make this happen, I've loved the changes that have been made in here.
Okay.
Or suggested changes, but we talked about trying to make this a required course of the 90 hours. How do we do that? Can we do that? Can we make that recommendation, or?
There are two separate discussions.
Okay.
So one, assuming this is right, one would be just the overall review of the content, but a separate discussion can be had probably as a separate agenda item at another meeting about requiring the course.
And the only reason I ask that is because as it's titled broker responsibility, we might make changes to it that pertain just to brokers, but if we're trying to make it a required course for all licensees before they renew their license, we may have to give some consideration of what we're putting in here.
So that's a good point and a good distinction to make. There's been a few conversations. One is perhaps the 30-hour real estate brokerage course as a requirement. Another is a requirement for all license holders to take the 6-hour broker responsibility course. Those are two different things. Isn't BRWG talking about that also, or no?
There's a little bit of crossover there, though I think the recommendation coming from this group makes sense. Some of this is statutory. Right. So, but good timing, right? We're gonna go into session. So that is a recommendation that you all could make, that, gets put to the commission. If we want, we can put that on for the next meeting. That's October. There's still time at that point, for changes like that. If that's something that we want to consider for a future agenda item, we could.
And to clarify, would you want to consider the possibility of both or either of the courses in the discussion for the next meeting?
So, I'm just one voice and I'm speaking my thoughts, but the biggest problems that we see in the field, while the brokers aren't supervising, they're a small minority of the piece. It's the actual operator in the field, the licensee in the field, that doesn't realize the relationship they have to the broker and what their responsibilities are back to the broker. And to the public, it's creating a problem. They're running amok.
2 o'clock, that'll be just fine. I will see you then.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
So are you recommending that the 30-hour one?
Well, I would love to make a recommendation that the 30-hour broker responsibility course be a required course of the 90 additional hours that's required as part of their 270 hours. That was not good English, but I think you got the idea what I'm trying to say.
Are you saying that the broker responsibility course ought to be included in the 30?
No, I'm saying the broker responsibility course ought to be a mandatory part of the 270 hours.
So, but just to be clear, it's actually the real estate brokerage course.
Right, real estate brokerage.
Right.
This course we're looking at, right?
The
now.
Not the
30-hour
6
course
hours.
as
Real
opposed-
estate brokerage
Yes.
course, 30 hours, yes. ma'am.
Yes,
So of the 3 30-hour courses required on the first renewal, real estate brokerage is required, and the other 2 will be of their choosing.
It will,
I think that's a different take on it. So one, I think Bill's talking about pre-licensing, and Mike, I think you were talking about requirement for SAE, right?
Well, I'm actually talking about a requirement for SAE, honestly.
Oh, okay, not for
Not
initial
for
license.
pre-license, no.
Okay. Well,
To
that
get their
probably
broker's license,
would be
they have to
easier
have a
to do,
brokerage course.
right? That would not
I think that's a
require.
statutory change as well. I mean, I think we can look at, feel free to throw out ideas
Yeah.
out there, but I think a lot of these may be statutory changes. That doesn't mean that they can't happen, it's just a different process.
And I may be in the minority, it just
Sure.
appears to me from the Dallas-Fort Worth market that we have an issue.
This is market.
Yeah, I mean, we hear about it a lot, and not just from Dallas-Fort Worth.
I couldn't agree more in my understanding that the commissioners and Chairman Kessler especially wants us to want this. I think it's very important. So I guess today, that could be next time, right? We're talking about that.
Right.
We'll talk about other ideas we got for the next agenda. Do we want to, today, do we want to incorporate any additional brokerage? Do we make any changes to what Jen and them worked on now? For today, is there anything in here? It seems to incorporate everything we had talked about, but is there anything else we want to add?
I like the changes that have been made, we talked about them, and I thought they were well thought out.
Looks to me like, but anybody have any thoughts to add, anything else? Anybody out there? Okay, if there are none, then would this be an action item that we accept it as it is?
To recommend to the commission, right?
Yes, that we change this basic qualifying approval form to the commission?
I want to just point something out to you all too. We already have in rule a requirement for providers to update, and this is a little bit different from what I spoke about earlier. But when ESAC first went through and revised all the content for the qualifying courses, which was like 2014 to 2016, a rule was built in and adopted that requires education providers who offer the course through classroom delivery, gives them 12 months to complete the revisions to the course, and those offered through distance education have 18 months to complete the revisions to the course. So I just, there's no action you need to take there. I just want to make you aware that that's a component of making this recommendation. It's not like it gets adopted and in 30 days, everybody's made the changes.
Right.
There is that buffer time.
Okay, as an action item, do we hear a motion to, I guess we'd say, accept this with the changes made?
Yes.
There's a motion, second?
Second.
All in favor? Any opposed? Okay, thanks, it passes. All right. Now we can talk about items for the next meeting. Right off the bat, to discuss whether this qualifying real estate course, the 30-hour course, should be made mandatory for SAE, right? That'd be one item we'll talk about. Okay. The second, of course, will be what we discussed about property management that we'll look at. Okay. Something new's come up through the Texas Realtor Task Force I was on yesterday. Blake Bennett had the idea, and it may not be our place, I just want to say, that really hit me square in the face. There's all kinds of different disclosures that need to be made for taxing authorities, and there's no one place to go get them all. For example, there's the new PIDs that are out there everywhere. in cities, and they have taxing authority. He's running into problems in different parts, especially the Dallas-Fort Worth area, of agents trying to figure out which notice to give and how to give the notices. And so I don't know if it's appropriate for us to think about, but there are muds, pits, groundwater districts, everything to tax. And that's probably outside, but I just want to say that's something that's on some people's minds right now, because there are more of these things happening, and there's no one place that we can go in the state to find out, for this piece of property, here are all the different areas that you could be taxed on.
Isn't that sort of geographic competence?
I do too, I think so. And plus, there's a different form according to, he said under statute, you have to use the proper notice. And some people aren't given proper notice, so I don't know if it's appropriate for us.
It's all under the notice provisions in the broker lawyer committee form, including the bid notices. It's all in there. And if the agent doesn't know how to find it in their local community, I'm sorry.
Let's see, any other possible ideas? We've got two. Yes, Mike.
I'd like to discuss the provider passes rates being published to the public. Like I mentioned before, we go through a lot of data, and the data we receive, we definitely have some issues with it on our end that we're trying to work through. But the passage rates being available to the public, I'd really like to recommend that we change how that's done, and this could be statutory, so I'll let the pros handle that. Reviewing other types of professions, the only two in the state license that I could find that actually publish provider rates are real estate license holders for sales broker and not appraisers actually, inspectors. Appraisers are not published. The rest of the professions through TALCB and other state regulators, what they publish instead of the provider rates is they are publishing to the public the overall pass rates for the state, and more specifically, the subject areas. So what we have for our qualifying courses for the license is 14 subject areas. And so we have no idea as providers how well students are doing on their exams in those 14 areas. We just know whether or not they passed or failed based off of a percentage. So just as an example, if I'm the provider, I have a student take 3 classes, 30 hours through us, they take 2 through another school, 1 through another school, pass or fail, and I can be corrected. Because the majority were taken through our provider, we're going to get either credited for the pass or the fail. A major issue with that is all the questions they missed could have been from a subject area from which we were not responsible for teaching. They all could have came from contracts, contract law of contracts, or finance, which was from another provider. The end result is we have students that if they're failing or passing, it could go on either side of that equation. They're either not getting the license or they're getting it, that we have no idea how they're performing in the 14 subject areas. So as a provider, we don't know where to increase the knowledge. If they're entering the industry and the industry is seeing issues in certain areas such as contracts, are they getting their license? And are we paying enough attention to contract law or not paying enough attention to it? It could go on either side of the equation, pass or fail. But putting it out there, showing that the provider has a pass rate based off of that, one, it's kind of an anomaly, with it only being the 2 I could find. I looked at 40 other professions in the state licensed by the state. The majority of them, and I have all those professions and what they publish, I've researched it all. They're only publishing overall pass rates, and they're publishing the subject areas from which people are performing well or not in. And so I'd like us to look at that and see if we're doing that correctly, if we're meeting the intent of what we should be doing, and if it's accurate. Is that a lot?
I mean, are you asking for a pass rate by subject matter?
I'm asking that the provider isn't put out there showing the provider's pass rate. We're just publishing the overall pass rate for students. And then the second ask is that we do have access, the public has access to see the 14 subject areas, how well they're performing in.
How could you break that down?
Well, the Pearson VUE test breaks it down.
Right.
So
It can, but do they?
They do, because the students, when a student takes the state and national exam, if they fail an area, they're told the subject area of the 14 from which they need work in and how many from that subject area they missed. So the data's there, it's just whether or not we're pulling it. As providers, we don't have access, so we have no way to know how to improve. And the, I guess as an industry, we have no view of that. We can't see the areas from which we need to improve.
So just to set the kind of the statutory framework a little bit, passage rate data, that is a requirement by statute. There is a statute that requires us to have rules that that provide a method to post the examination passage rate data on our website in a manner aggregated by program, which is provider, and by license group. But there may be some flexibility in the rule, but in terms of posting, that is a statutory requirement.
Right.
And I just want to add that we do have the link. We do post the exam topic reports that Pearson VUE provides. We post those, we publish those quarterly. So I think that is, I'm trying to find the route to it, education tab. There it is, licensing. Okay, if somebody has control of the Teams screen, I do not, I'm not logged into the meeting.
Yeah, is it on the website?
Yeah, I'll point you there, just as a reference. So I think this is helpful information. I think this is a good conversation to have.
Okay.
And I appreciate Mike you bringing that forward. I think given what the, you know, like Abby said, what is required by the statute, we are required to establish a benchmark. We do need to do these things, but maybe we can look at different ways of doing that. So Amber, if you will go to the education drop-down menu when you get your screen sharing.
How do we cover the fact that they took 3 courses at one school, 1 course at another school?
Good question.
Well, and that
It's the most recent. My understanding is that it's the most recent course, that if they took 90% from one provider and 10% from the last, it reflects only on the last provider.
No.
Okay.
A couple of things. Sorry, there are multiple conversations going on. Let me get this up. Amber, if you go to education and then go down licensing, exam information, and then the exam topics report. So on the left-hand side, you see every quarter, and you can open one of those. And basically, this is the breakdown of the content of the exam. So that's there. And Chuck, what were you just saying?
Well, as Rick was pointing out, if you take 10% of your courses
Okay.
from the last one, they're the ones that get the black eye.
Right.
If they don't pass.
Well, and so, I mean, this is all programmatic, this is all IT speak, which I'm not qualified to do. But the way that is calculated is through some type of code that's written on the back end that looks at first time test takers and then pulls their education in and looks for a majority. So basically, if it's 50-50, they're not counted. If it's 4 and 2, they count the right. Then the credit or negative action goes toward the individual, the provider.
Okay, so do we want to,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. We want to add this as an agenda item next time.
I don't think so.
Sure. Okay, good. So we've got 3 new agenda items. Anything else we want to add next time?
Mike, if you wanna, provide, if you wanna send me an email summarizing a little bit of what you said.
Absolutely.
Just that way we can be prepared in terms of what we're gonna have for you all to consider and look at.
I will help with anything.
I believe
All right,
that.
Matt, you're
Sure. You're very data driven, which I appreciate.
Looking around, I see no other new agenda items, I think. Anybody out in the Ethernet? Okay.
Next meeting.
We'll pick our next meeting. One last thing I'll say before, as we do our research into the property management, I don't know how many of you are members of the Texas Realtors, but I did a little research on what articles they had posted about property management since 2018. I couldn't distribute because of copyright. I could ask their permission, but if you're already members of Texas Realtors, go to their website and you can pull a lot of things like, can landlords limit certain dog breeds? Dealing with malicious act by tenants, what tenants leave behind, those kind of things. So that's a source. The other, we're not lawyers, but the State Law Library published an update on new laws from the 87 Texas legislature that may apply. Notice requirements to a lease dwelling located in a floodplain. A fee collected by a landlord in lieu of a security deposit. Those could apply to our single family residential managers. So just some ideas there. All right. When do we want to have our next meeting? We've kind of posted, we've got an idea, October 3rd, 4th, or 5th. Does anybody have any?
Didn't we already set it for October 3rd?
That's the current,
That's
yeah.
current setting.
There's just alternate dates in case.
I hope, because I've set travel schedules around these dates.
Okay. Anybody have a problem with